The first teaser for Squid Game Season 3 just dropped, and I'm here to break down every detail in the 80 seconds that we all just saw. The opening scene, of course, shows us 6 masked soldiers return Gi-yoon to the post-war common space, and the first thing that I'd like to point out is that player 120 is seen approaching the gift coffin, and there's not yet any indication as to whether she hid the gun, kept it, lost it, or whatever, and I think that this could be a pretty critical element to the plot of Season 3. As you may recall, she was about to attack the guards at the end of Season 2, but player 149 talked her out of it, and we have yet to see what happens to the gun that she was holding. Granted, the guards will probably be checking the entirety of the common space, but in the previous episode when player 120 chose not to continue fighting, it's likely that she wouldn't surrender the gun, but rather attempt to hide it. Even though it's just one gun, it would be a slight detail to add some pretty good tension to the plot. Either way though, I'm assuming it probably just disappears between the seasons or something. Who knows? We then jump into the 4th game, and we know it's the 4th game because 58 players remain. There's 29 on the left, Gi-yoon in the middle, and 28 players on the right. Gi-yoon and the other players seem to have emerged from a dagger-shaped door, while the next one is keyhole-shaped. I don't have the slightest clue as to what this indicates, and it also seems as though the dispenser of the team-selecting instrument also has some sort of keyhole shape. Again, I don't know exactly what this means, but those designs are surely reasonable to take into consideration. Within this game, we also saw the main group characters split up, with Gi-yoon, both future parents, the old woman, Min-soo, and his enemy all on Team Red, while Team Blue had the gambler, the trans, the shaman, the number 1 op, and Dae-ho. However, I will say that the whole population being split into just 2 teams doesn't mean anything just yet. I noticed something kinda interesting and worth mentioning in this scene. It is unlikely that the entirety of either the red team or blue team is defeated within the 4th game. In this scene, you see an unidentified body wearing a blue vest behind Gi-yoon, so it does confirm that a blue team player is killed. And knowing Squid Game, this player was shot and not beat to death, so there is obviously a way to lose this game as a player and be shot by a guard. The clock behind Gi-yoon also says 456, which is insane and intentional, and I thought that was pretty sweet. However, the previous season finale had a mid-credits clip that shows players 96, 100, and 353 approaching the doll that we're all familiar with in a game hall very much different than the 4th game hall shown. This indicates that player 100 survives the 4th game despite being on the blue team, so it is likely that the pool of survivors will be a mix of red and blue. However, I'd still assume that given that it's teams, a minimum of half of the players will be eliminated during this game. I want to say that the combination of the mother and son having different colors, and then the later clip of the mother crying is supposed to make us believe that she loses her son, but I think that it could very easily be something else because as we know, Squid Game is meant to be misleading. We also see a brief scene introducing the VIPs, and right away, you'll notice that none of them were the VIPs seen in Season 1. I found this fascinating because it makes it hard to grasp how big the audience of Wicked sponsors is, even consisting of 2 female VIPs. Just kidding, that is a dude, but he really looked like a woman from that shot. Anyways, I found it interesting that Gi-yoon was spared by the frontman and just dropped back into the game, given that the VIPs watching this series were probably not that familiar with Gi-yoon himself. Granted, a VIP in Season 1 mentioned watching the previous games before their arrival on a huge TV and how that didn't compare, but in Season 1, these VIPs we see here, they didn't even exist to us. So what's the point in the frontman sparing a guy that his current VIPs don't really know? Did he just assume that they wanted to see a former victor in the arena? There's also a subtle scene where Gi-yoon is shown to be handcuffed to a bed frame while it looks like the voting process is underway. From this, it is demonstrating that the staff has silenced Gi-yoon, and he now has to live with the fact that greed for money is going to keep the population in the games, and he's going to watch as more people gamble their lives away to pay off their debts and probably make him go insane. This next scene also shows Gi-yoon either unable to vote or naturally an X, with an obviously noticeable difference between the population of X's and O's. This tells the audience that the games will most likely continue to the 5th game, but we can already assume that's the case with the post-credit scene of the previous episode, and so the vote's not really going to go anywhere. The objective of Game 4 is not revealed, but the actual arena seems to be maze-shaped, and combat between players is permitted because player 120 is squared up against an unknown opponent. Game 5 is also not revealed in any way during the teaser, so our only info as to what it could be is still based off of the post-credit scene shown in Season 2. Looking back at Game 4 though, we all see players being handed a color-coded box with unknown contents. Perhaps it's some sort of individual capture the flag or something. Given that it doesn't look like all of Team Red or all of Team Blue are eliminated, maybe each player is given a flag to put on their person, and to escape the game, you need to grab a flag from the other team, obviously at the expense of the loser's life. This would be an okay game for a maze-shaped game hall, random team assignments, and a way to divide the game population in half, right? It would also make some sense out of player 120's fighting stance. Also, it is pretty likely that the dagger and the keyhole were indicating some sort of objective, right? This shot is the last thing we're given of game 4 in the teaser. From what we see, the room is divided by teams, and nearest to the keyhole doorway is player 44 and her cult that she acquired, who all happen to make it into the blue team. I don't know why, but I have a gut feeling that this game will be the end of all of them. I mean, in the initial season, game 4 was the first event that began to eliminate some of the real main characters, and we do know that Squid Game has to take down most of the population before the series finale, right? As for the return of player 246, I could see it going one of two ways. This brief frame is what we're given for the tracker scene. By the looks of it, it's obviously player 246's facial hair and structure with a yellow background. The yellow background is probably right in the corridor area where he got shot, where he may have even been given a second chance just because he's a living player and the VIPs would like more contestants. If this is the case, I would assume that the scanner is not in the hands of guard 11 because it monitors their life status as well as the tracker planted there by the staff, so it might be connected to the refreshing of the floor scoreboard, so if 11 was trying to break him out, she would probably know better than to scan his tracker and demonstrate his life signs. However, if it doesn't refresh the master list of remaining players, maybe she was just making sure she didn't kill him, and she was going to try to get him off the island. I'll cover this aspect of the theory shortly. Another notable thing we see is that guard 11 commits further to defecting against the island, and whatever relevance it has, she does sneak outside the facility somehow. Also, with an exhaust chute that big going to the outside world, how hasn't Jun-ho found the island? Speaking of which, we were given 2 clips of Jun-ho, one of him without anyone else on screen, at the shore of an island that is probably very relevant to the story, as well as entering an elegant marble room that is definitely meant to be for the VIPs. He's still alone in this clip, but this does indicate that we'll finally see him infiltrate the island once again, which also means that I'd assume that they found out the boat captain was corrupt and took action against them. I don't know what happened to the rest of the crew, but Jun-ho did land on the island with diving gear, so maybe they knew where the island was but figured that it was too risky to take an entire boat there. We also have this outside shot, which is slightly confusing because guard 11 removed her hood in other clips where she was defecting, but suddenly has it on when she's outside. I'd assume that being outside without executive order is already a sin for their job, so hiding her face wouldn't really be a concern for her, given that identifiable or not, she's probably breaking a huge rule. Either way, I don't know who this could be, whether it's player 246 or a real guard, or just guard 11, but I would still love to know what this clip is indicating. Maybe she snuck 246 off the island and then snuck back in through the exhaust chute? Who knows? We also have a very significant scene of guard 11 in a dark place that is none other than the Squid archives room, which we can tell thanks to the wall, binders, and shelving that all matches the archive room from the first season. She's holding a lighter, but who knows what she's gonna do with it. Burn the place down? We also see a very brief shot of MG Coin with his red vest on, and he is all bloody and he has a pretty worried look on his face. I really hope nothing bad is happening with his very pregnant ex/situationship that he's actively fumbling before our eyes. I really don't. For whatever value this adds, the bloody arrow scene here was drawn by none other than player 44 herself, as we could see her holding this beady bracelet thing during Mingle, and of course wearing it all at the start of the 3rd episode. With that, what the arrow means, I haven't a clue. We also see player 149 crying very hard, and again, I would like to say, we're probably supposed to expect this to indicate the death of player 7. However, I think that it could honestly be something else. Players are standing behind her, watching, which could mean that the disaster's right in front of her, unless she just returned to the dormitory after completing the game herself and just waited, only for player 7 to not return himself. But I don't know. I still think that if her son died during the 4th game, the scene of her crying wouldn't take place in the dorm room. I'd also like to add that her hair is down, which meant that she did take the knife out of her hair clip and possibly had to use it to stab someone. Is she facing guilt for having killed someone? Is she the one who took down the lunatic player 124? There's a lot of context to consider for this clip. The piggy bank is also lowered to the iconic tile floor, and it looks pretty full. However, given that there's multiple guards, I'd like to assume that even though they're supposed to be everywhere anyways, I have a feeling that there's obviously not a lone victor. However, this bank being lowered would mean that the games have concluded on their own without the success of an invasion, and maybe the few remaining players just voted to end it. I mean, the bank truly was very full, and there was probably like 12 players left who just decided that it's time to call it. The teaser, of course, ends with Gi-yoon standing up, a shot of player 222 not wearing her vest, and a baby crying. In the shot where player 222 is crying and not wearing her vest, I'd say it's very safe to assume that this part happened after Game 4, indicating that she survived Game 4, so now we have given proof that players from both the red team and the blue team can survive the game, and if we revisit the scene of the grandma crying, you'll notice how there's only one row of bed frames in the background. This happened after Game 4 in the first season, where the 17 remaining players only needed one row of beds, exposing most of the walls in the back. Well, this is now the case for this scene, so player 149 and all the blurry faces behind her can be added to the list of survivors of Game 4, so maybe this does mean her son doesn't make it back. And finally, the baby crying is probably a very obvious hit towards the season, but it doesn't make any other indications towards player 222, 333, or anything else. For that, I'd assume we'd have to wait for the next teaser or just the final season itself. But that's all I got today. What's the craziest thing you noticed about the teaser?